Meetings, our very first meeting just a month ago, we talked about sort of an introduction to the homelessness system, the crisis response system, and we talked about the continuum of care, ESG or Emergency Solutions Grant, who's eligible for those different funding sources and what each one, the kind of programs that they fund. And then we transitioned to conversations around, in our next training, the intake and assessment and engagement process. Focused a little bit on strategies for what intake and engagement and that initial kind of an assessment might look like during the first couple of weeks of an enrollment in a project. And I want to build on some of those concepts now and talk about how we manage client intake and assessment, but from a client-centered practice. And we introduced some of the concepts of trauma responsive or trauma informed care. Those are going to come up again today in our training as we're managing the intake and assessment process, building out our relationship with the client in a way that's going to support effective assessment, really strong housing plans, engagement. We'll want to understand the principles of trauma and how they might inform different kinds of responses to our approaches at intake and assessment. We're also today going to introduce the concept of critical time intervention. This is often shorthand. The acronym is CTI. For some of you, that might be a familiar acronym. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is. And although it's an evidence-based practice for housing assistance, there are elements of CTI that apply in lots of different housing and shelter environments. So we'll try and talk about how that might be applicable if you're an outreach worker, if you're doing shelter management or intake. There are elements of CTI that are going to be helpful for you. We'll also talk about some ethical boundaries, what kinds of information, once we have it, how do we use that information, and when there are kind of, sort of buckles in the road or challenges with following through on our housing plan when we have information or when we're given information that might conflict with how we thought we were going to be responding initially. So it poses some questions, and we have some examples of maybe how to navigate that. I'm going to go ahead and start with a Zoom poll, get us kind of acclimated again to this Zoom functionality, hoping you're all engaged in asking questions through the chat function, or even as we're talking, some of you have come off mute, which we totally welcome and invite. But let's focus on this poll question just to kind of get us warmed up. So I'm curious, how long have you been in your current position? Is it less than 6 months, 6 months to a year, maybe 1 year to 5 years, or more than 5 years? So go ahead and answer that question. And then if you scroll down on the poll, there's a second question that we want you to focus on as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results just so you can see. So it looks like we've got people with pretty good tenure, 1 to 5 years, and then a couple of folks over 5 years. That's great. But that's also mixed with people who are relatively new, less than a year in the position. And I think there's interest and engagement and excitement that new staff might be bringing to this, and then skill sets and experience of our seasoned veterans. So both of those can sort of, we can integrate both of those in our training today. Some of the skills that seem most prominent right now are respecting clients' perspectives and building trust. We're going to be talking about trauma-informed responses. So it looks like there's an opportunity there to kind of punch that up a little bit. And persistence, some areas that maybe are frustrating or challenging when you come across cases where you're not quite sure, or sometimes you feel like you're just hitting your head against a wall. All the best efforts at case management are not yielding the results. And so we'll talk about maybe some strategies for managing that. All right. Well, thanks for weighing in on those polls. I'm going to go ahead and move along. Just scanning to see, okay, if any questions or chat functions come up, but interrupt me. Liz, I know that you're keeping an eye on that, and Andrea too, just jump in if something comes up. So client-centered practice in homeless services essentially is the
Okay,
framework.
give me 1 second.
Oh, oh, okay. I think we're good. By treating clients as the experts in their own lives, certainly, but in understanding how we're going to design and then provide services by using them as the experts, we're actually prioritizing their autonomy. We're building respect. We're customized support plans are prioritized over sort of a rigid or a one-sized, more institutional approach. So all of these core principles are really essential in building a foundation of respect with our clients, building trust through empathy and empowering their choice. And we're clearer and we're direct about the services that we can offer and the expectations of the client's participation in our programs. So we persist when conditions change, when it seems like the client's interest is waning, or maybe there's external factors that are coming to play that are creating barriers either for you or for the client. So all of this, if we're actively engaged in demonstrating and building these principles, it's going to demonstrate our competency to the participant, to the client, and it's going to contribute to a stronger working relationship and ultimately better outcomes. So I want to spend a little bit of time unpacking each of these and talking about what we mean by each of these. Respect is essentially rooted in this idea of cultural humility. We apply client choice and an understanding of the impacts of trauma in our clients' histories and also in their current lives. And we're honoring their autonomy and actively collaborating to design customized support plans that are going to empower the client to build a sense of regaining control over their own lives. And we're going to build trust over time by listening and respecting what they bring to the relationship. So we want to pay attention to the language that we're using, especially during intake and assessment. So instead of describing a client as non-compliant or they're uncooperative, we might say that the client, well, they missed an appointment and we're working to reschedule. And instead of the client being unmotivated, we might use language that describes that we understand the client is feeling overwhelmed and the process of engaging in their plan is frustrating to them, and that their disengagement is a defense mechanism. And so when we understand that that's what's going on in the client's life and respecting that space, oftentimes just listening to what's going on and listening to the client's story, hearing their experience, that's actually going to empower them. It's going to build respect and it's going to motivate them to engage. So we'll get better outcomes if we actually demonstrate respect for the client and wherever they are in their process. Trust and empathy are often the result of this practice of active listening. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this concept of active listening, where we ask open-ended questions and then we just listen for the response. We don't interrupt, we're just listening without judgment. And that's demonstrating empathy. It's demonstrating that we have compassion, that we're really trying to understand and hear the client. And I think in our last session, we talked about trauma. And so we introduced like these concepts of how that plays out as we're trying to build trust and empathy. And we mentioned that trauma plays out differently for different people. Sometimes people are combative. Other times they're withdrawn. And all of these attempts to engage them are not yielding the results. Sometimes people act out and they act out in kind of illogical ways that don't make sense to us. The key is that most of the time, this is not about us. It's the client is not responding to you personally. They're using whatever defense mechanisms that have worked for them in the past, or that they're just trying to manage the stress or the trauma, the feeling of being dislocated from their current experience. And that's all due to homelessness. So even though we may feel frustrated at times, responding with compassion is actually going to yield better results. And using kind of trust and empathy are key elements of building that. The next one I want to talk about is client choice. I consider client choice the sort of crown jewel of client-centered practices. When we focus on providing clients with real choices that align with their goals and their priorities, the clients are more likely to feel supported. They're more likely to feel heard in our engagement. So meeting clients where they are requires that we kind of switch the focus. This is not about, or at least initially, this is not about persuasion. This is about understanding. So rather than trying to get the client to hear your perspective about what they need to be doing right now to end their homelessness, we listen to what they want, what's important to them, what's going on with them in their lives right now. And the real trick is then trying to understand what's going on with them and what's motivating them, and then tying that motivation, that interest, to a housing goal or to an employment or an income goal. And we're going to talk much more about that sort of that trick. That is I think of this as sort of the secret sauce. You're listening to them to understand what is motivating them and then using that to tie to a housing plan. So it feels the experience from the client is that their choice is being heard and actually being leveraged in helping to resolve their housing crisis. The next one I want to focus on is transparency. And I'm just going to share a personal experience about transparency. I learned when I was working in Iowa, another project on a coordinated entry redesign. This was last year. We were working with clients to assess and to understand what kinds of projects or programs they would be eligible for the coordinated entry process. And the focus was all about this assessment for eligibility and then getting people on a list. The reality of that list, though, was that only about 10% of the people who were on the rapid rehousing or the PSH list were actually going to get a rapid rehousing or a PSH referral. So in doing this redesign, what we understood, the caseworkers and the case managers who were doing the assessment felt like they were giving people hope, like you're eligible for rapid rehousing and for PSH, so I'm going to go ahead and put you on that list. But what we realized is that it's really not a true option for many people. Like 90% of the people were not going to get rapid rehousing referrals or PSH, at least in the next year or so. So what clients, by giving them that false hope, we're not actually making them better. We're not helping them. When we started telling people in true, honest, direct terms that a referral was actually not likely to rapid rehousing, they approached the relationship differently. They saw us by providing accurate, clear, direct information, and we were using transparency and honesty, and that actually builds trust. So even though we weren't likely to get the rapid rehousing referral or the PSH referral, the clients were more engaged and they worked more diligently because they understood, like, okay, we've got to pursue other housing options. Rapid housing is not going to be it for me. I get that. They felt they had an honest partner that was helping them navigate the available housing options that were likely materialize rather than just giving people false hope by putting them on a list. So that sense of transparency was really key in building the relationship and helping them build motivation towards a plan that was actually more realistic or feasible. The next one I want to talk about is persistence. I want to start by acknowledging your job is tough. I get it. You are all doing incredible work every day to engage and support people in resolving their crisis or getting them to a housing. And most of the time, that hard work is going unnoticed. That gets frustrating. It's exhausting for you all. I totally get it. Persistence is a skill that we have to work on and develop over time. You don't just have the sense of persistence. It's something that we have to, that's sort of a muscle that we have to build. So it's hard to reach back out to a client after they've missed three case management appointments. So we keep like scheduling and then they just don't show up or they miss their appointments. And that is frustrating. I get it. But when they've not demonstrated any progress or they're disengaging, what that means is that we might need to change our strategy. We need to persist with maybe a different engagement technique or just kind of like keep at it and keep rescheduling, even though it doesn't feel like it's yielding the results that we want in that moment. I was talking to a friend of mine recently who does really difficult rehousing work in Dallas, where they take people who have had long periods of unsheltered homelessness in camps on the street and they're moving them direct to housing. And I asked her what she did when the clients that she's been working with for months and months, and maybe even after they've moved into housing and they're showing some signs of stability, And then they start doing things that might jeopardize the lease, or they're making illogical choices that are not contributing to their housing stability. And I said, what do you do when it feels like all of this work is for naught? She said, I just take a deep breath. And when people lose their housing, I rehouse them. It's as simple as that. It's not easy. I thought that there was some sort of magic that we can keep everyone housed if we just worked hard enough. And she's like, about 85% of the time that works. But unfortunately, and we're not good at predicting this, some people have sort of, they backslide or issues come up or challenge or they make poor decisions or things go on in their life that they can't control. And our job is to be persistent in working with them to re-engage, rehouse them, get them back on track, and just acknowledging that that's part of the work that we need to do. It's the same process, we just house them again. And I know that that's tough. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that you all are doing great work. And so I appreciate the persistence that you're demonstrating. And finally, competence. Practicing all of these skills is going to contribute to greater and greater competency. So we'll focus on respect, on trust, on empathy, on offering true choices in a very transparent way, being clear and direct, and then persistence. And when things don't work out as planned, we're just going to keep at it. Practice all of these, and that's what builds competency over time. Sharing our struggles and working with your peers or your supervisors to build the skills, these competency skills, is going to make you an effective case manager. We're going to have opportunities later in this training series, actually in person in July. And then after that in-person meeting, we have a community of practice scheduled where we're going to continue to engage and hear the kind of challenges that each of you are bringing to the table and collectively work as a team to identify potential solutions and talk about what tools and resources are available. And that's all going to build competency and make you better case managers over time. So let's review now, we'll transition a bit and review the core concepts of trauma and how they're impacting a person's level of engagement or how you might respond to that. And then that's going to lead into a conversation about CTI, that critical time intervention that I mentioned earlier. So I think this is now a transition to Liz. Am I
That's
right?
great. Yes, Andrea and I are going to talk about
Perfect.
principles of trauma response care. She's laughing because I make bring Andrea in because she is expert in this. So if I start making stuff up, Andrea will throw things at me and jump in with great examples. And Matt, I just wanted to back up for a minute because I had a thought about everything you talked about, and I do always like to reiterate that when you talk about persistence and competency, what you're also doing, what we're always all doing, is modeling behavior for our tenants,
Mm.
clients, participants. So, being persistent, that's just a huge skill. Like you said, it's a muscle we have to work on. And competence, and it makes me think of it as I look at Andrea, because she does a great training on this, how important it is for participants to feel competent. That
Yep.
if they don't have confidence in themselves and they don't think the world sees them as competent, they cannot get housing, access services, get employed. So just as we talk about these skills, I think so many of them are just transferable, right? We're just modeling really good behaviors for the folks that we're working with and hoping that they have persistence and that they can see themselves as competent too. So just a thought. All right, so Andrea and I are going to talk about trauma. Experiencing homelessness is traumatic, right? So just from the start, we already know that there is trauma. It's not rare, it's not exceptional, it's widespread, and it shapes how people access care, how they respond to providers, and how they engage with services. So before we do anything else, we have to acknowledge this, and we have to acknowledge the history that people carry with them, and we may not see it, and may not know anything about it, and that this awareness is the foundation we're going to build upon. We're going to always prioritize physical and emotional safety. People can't work, get services, do things if they aren't feeling safe. When I thought about this, I thought there are times in my life I haven't felt safe. And boy, did I feel paralyzed. Boy, could I not move on. So we always want to acknowledge it and do what we can to make it better. So safety isn't just a locked door, a safe place to be, but it might be in a waiting room trying to find some quiet space for folks. It may be welcoming signage when people come into a program so that they feel safe. Even as simple as when you're working with someone saying, Would you like the door open or closed? Does this space feel okay to you? And recognizing that that's just really important so that these minor changes to physical, social, emotional environment can really make participants feel safety and hopefully reduce the likelihood of re-traumatization. Should I pause, Andrea? Is there anything else you want to jump in on?
Mhm.
I also think safety applies to the case manager,
Yes.
right? If
Yep.
you feel safe, you're going to help them feel that. So that we want to pay a lot of attention to that, right? And Liz mentioned, you know, when we're meeting with somebody, if we don't feel safe, maybe we go to a public place or something like that. We check it out with them, but that's really important.
Great. Very good. So Matt talked a little bit about trust, and we know that trust is built with consistency, transparency, again, persistence, showing up, that it's really important. You can't have trust if you're not there, if you're missing an appointment, if you're, and again, and I'll always bring it back because I think it's so helpful. We're modeling good behavior. So if we want our clients to show up, we better be showing up. Folks who have experienced trauma struggle, right? They struggle to trust systems and to providers because they've been failed a lot. We're going to build trust through predictable, reliable behavior. Again, we're going to follow through on what we say. We're going to be really clear about changes or delays and not surprise clients. So I like Matt's story also. We got to be honest. You qualify for rapid rehousing, but oof, that is probably not, you're not going to get it. And so that's part of building trust is just being honest, also being
Mhm.
honest about expectations.
Remember when you have these conversations around transparency that, yeah, you do qualify for rapid rehousing, but the list is long. Can we figure out what to do in the beginning? Because you want to use transparency to teach people how to work a system. You don't want to tell people, right, you're never going to get rapid rehousing, right? So, though it's frustrating for a case manager, right? Because here are all these things that people are eligible for, and it's going to take forever to get them. So you want to engage in a process of working the system. Can they stay on the rapid rehousing list? Probably, right? But there may be something else that best fits their needs, and one of their needs is for speed, right?
Yep.
And nobody wants to stay in the shelter or on the streets for an additional year to get somebody that's something that they may be eligible for. So you want to have that engage in that conversation of working the system together.
Great. So we always also want to inform, offer choice. So Matt talked a little bit about this, right? So we want to see our folks as expert, both in their lives and in the choices they're making. So folks who are living with trauma, control's been taken away from them in a lot of ways. And so we want to help give it back, right? Even in small ways, that can be really powerful. And it can be small things. Again, we talked about door open, door closed. Boy, I have a lot of questions to ask for intake and what, how long do you think you have on this? Can we do 5, 10 minutes? Do you want to finish it up tomorrow? Do you want to work in a private space? Do you want to write it down? Do you want to talk to me about it? All of these give control back to folks who we don't, again, want to re-traumatize by asking hard and scary questions over and over again. So anything that you think you can give as a choice, that's what we want to do. And we just want folks to know that you're always listening to them. So we're taking their feedback. I just can't do intake today. I'm not going to answer any of your questions today. Okay. How about tomorrow? What does tomorrow look like for you? So, kind of wrapping all the things we've talked about persistency, consistency, but also choice. So, it's always, and it's not easy, right? You're like, oh man, I'm given choice, but I'm being persistent and I'm not getting my answers. So, it isn't easy. And like Matt said, this is really, really hard work. So just like we want folks to be expert, we want them to direct what we're doing. Again, we want them to have control. We're here, and it goes beyond offering choices. It means Matt talked about this, really actively listening and centering the goals and the judgment of the folks we're working with first, because that's what matters. Trauma-informed care recognizes that these folks are experts, but that we have to support them and not try to push them. So we're walking alongside them in this journey, but not telling them what to do. Andrew, you look like you want to say something. You want to say something?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of,
I
I
know
think
Andrew
there's
can.
There's a couple, yeah. I think there's a couple of things there, right? Matt talked about real goals. That's one of the things that we're really going to work on is it has to be something that people can feel in their heart. Look, frankly, housing stabilization is not the most sexy goal any client has ever seen, right? So
Mhm.
they're not exactly jumping for it, but they may want something when they go into housing. We're going to talk about how to get that information. So you've got to do it within the goals and that we realize you have limited choices, and that's okay. You can help people make choices within a structure, or if they want something that's outside of the structure, we can help them make that connection. And that's all part of this, right? But the important thing is to get real goals. And look, the real goals that most people have, probably most people in this Zoom room, and also most people we serve, is money, a honey, and wheels, right? Why do you want housing? So I can get a date. Why do I want housing? So I can get a car, right? And are we gonna get everybody a car? Are we gonna turn ourselves into Match.com? God, no. But you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna talk about the connection with the things that they really want to the things that we're asking them to do. We are gonna ask them to do things that they don't like, right? In order to maintain housing. But if it's connected to the things that they do want, then that's a very different thing. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Good. All right. And finally, we're going to talk about always using strength-based language. So we're never looking at and framing the situation as, "Ooh, what's wrong with you?" It's what's happened to you and what have you survived? Because we know that folks who have experienced trauma often feel like something's very wrong with them and feel like the world is looking at them in that way. So we really want to change that lens. We really want to change that language. It also really matters how we talk about our participants to one another and what kind of culture we create in our team. So you may be frustrated, you may be angry because, again, this is really hard work. We always want to use respectful language. Matt talked about it a little bit. Instead of saying that someone is defiant and difficult, we're reframing it as they may need another opportunity. They need a little bit more time to get this done. And that becomes really important. As you guys know, the culture of your agency really matters, and the language we use really matters. And really importantly, as you're going through intakes, assessments, service plans, we always want to congratulate folks on their success. We always want to be strength based. There is something. You know what? What happened today and your folks are angry and upset. You showed up. You're here. That's a success. So we want to celebrate the wins with folks, and we always want to celebrate all the successes and convey that to them. Okay.
An, an
Yeah.
easy way to do that is one of the things that people often tune into when they're case managers is something they like or admire about the person. If you can get in your head something you like and admire about the person, and it can be anything. It can be the colorful socks they wear. It can be everything else, right? It can be anything. You tune into that and it's going to shine out of you. You don't even have to say it sometimes, right? And that is going to convey that hope to people, and that's really important.
Okay, so continuing on, and again, we talked a little bit about this, understand behavior as communication, like Matt mentioned, I just mentioned, when a client shuts down, lashes out, that's not defiance, it's information that we are collecting from them to better understand what's happening. We know that trauma rewires how people respond to stress and what that looks like. And difficult behavior is often really just a survival strategy. And so we have to keep that in mind as we're sitting across from folks that we know have experienced trauma. Um, we also want to be we just talked a little bit more about this before. Collaborate instead of directing. This is what we're working with them. We're not directing them. We are always making sure that clients are involved in goal setting. Andrew just talked a little about this. It needs to be meaningful to them. We know that if it's meaningful to them, they're much more likely to engage. When we direct someone, we create a kind of dependency, and then folks are always looking to us to continue to direct. But when we're being collaborative, folks are learning, and then folks are taking things into their own hands and moving forward. We never want to shame anyone. Shame is one of the most common outcomes of trauma, and so we don't want to do that. And it's one of the most damaging barriers to care. So it's really important that we avoid shame. We don't want to use withhold services. We don't want to use punitive language. We don't, Matt talked a little bit about this, right? We don't want to see setbacks as failures, and we don't want to re-traumatize folks with any of this. I also see Andrea's wheels turning. You jumping in,
No, it's
Andrea? No,
fine. I'm
okay.
fine.
You're chewing. Okay. I gotta move down. I'm having some technology here. Sorry about that. Oh, we're always going to explain what is happening and why we talked about this, right? This is part of the transparency. We had the good example of rapid rehousing. Uncertainty is really hard, right? Especially for folks who've been traumatized. So again, maybe we're not bringing great news that like the rapid rehousing may not work out, but it's much better than people putting trust in us and looking for the rapid rehousing that may never happen or may take a year in shelter to get. So we really want to make sure that we don't create uncertainty in folks' lives. We also can help this kind of narrate when we're talking to folks intake assessment. Like I said before a little bit, like I'm going to ask you some questions about your history. Here is why it matters. And then back a little bit to choice. If they're ready to answer, great. And if not, part of it might be, I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to tell me what you're comfortable telling me. So again, we're being honest, but we also are giving folks choice. And always, we have stacks of forms. So again, before we fill out a form, before we hand them a paper, we're going to explain why it matters and then give them choice about whether or not they're interested in doing it. And so this goes to permission. So before I ask a sensitive question, I'm going to say, "Is it okay if I ask you about this?" And they may say, "Yes, I'm all ready to talk about it. Great." And they may say, "No." We're always going to want to respect culture, identity, and lived experience. Sorry, I'm losing my notes here. Sorry.
You're good. We're going to ask people
Yeah,
in terms of
thanks.
lived experience. We're going to ask them what their plan is to solve this problem. I mean, I was kicking myself. There's a group in Cleveland that one of the questions they asked everybody in the shelter was, "What's your plan to end your homelessness?" And about 60% of people had a plan. Let's be clear, it wasn't always a great plan, but about 60% had a plan. And I was kicking myself, like, why didn't I ever ask people that question? Because I assumed if they were in the shelter, they didn't have any other options, but that really wasn't true. So it's like, okay, what would work for you? What's your plan? And then we can deal with that. It's a lot easier.
Yep. Yep. So also responding to conflict, this is so much easier said than done, with calm and not escalate. So when tensions come up, we want to really set the tone, calm things down. We know that if we're going to match someone's escalation, it's not going to make anything better. So we need to be regulated, grounded, and we want to just provide this opportunity for de-escalation. This is a skill, like Matt said, it's a muscle that we all need to practice, but it's very important that we do this. And again, I keep talking about it, but we also want to model this behavior. So you're very upset. I could match you and be very upset too, or I could try to provide a calm response and go from there. We also want to support connection with and healthy relationships. So we'll say this a lot. You can't be the only person, right? It's rough when it's, 1-800 call my case manager always. Do we have friends and family? Do we have pastors or rabbis? Do we have previous folks that you've worked with who you can bring in? Because it's a tough job. It's a lot of work and it's really hard to do alone, which takes us to you got to use supervision, right? This is really, really hard work. And it makes sense that this could be really stressful and create secondary trauma. You want to go to your supervisor and ask for help because, again, this is not easy. And the expectation is not that you follow this journey alone. Anything else, Andrea, before we move out of our principles?
I just want to say, I think we can safely assume that everybody we work with has experienced trauma. Everybody.
Yep.
So that these principles apply to everybody.
Yep. Great. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about problem solving. as we engage folks. So we said this before, you know the why, but if your client or participant does not know the why, they don't really want to engage with you. So we have to figure this out. And Matt talked a little bit about it. Andrea does fantastic trainings on this, which is the so that principle, right? Let's get at why I want what I want. I want housing. Why? So that, to Andrea's point, I can get a date, so that I can have a big screen TV, so that I can reunite with my kids, so that all kinds of reasons, right? So that my family respects me. So we always want to know the why in service planning, but we want to start with the why for why they want to engage with you, and it's hopefully so that you can help them do all of those things. We're going to ask, Matt talked about this a little bit, open-ended questions about what is working and what isn't working. We're not going to assume, we're always going to ask. We're going to invite clients into a real conversation. We don't want our conversations to be checklists, which is tricky, right? Because a lot of the work that we have to do feels bureaucratic. We've got a lot of questions, they're yes, no. And so as we work in engagement and, intake and assessment and service planning, we always want open-ended questions. And then we want to check back with them. We want their feedback. What felt helpful to you? What's working? What might be getting in the way? So the client's perspective are really shaping all the work that we're doing. Are you focused on the things the client cares about? Again, we've talked a little bit about this. If your client is saying, I care about housing stability, well, they're really probably trying to make you very happy. Housing stability does matter, but to Andrea's point, that's not sexy. I really want to pay my rent on time.
That's something we all look forward to, right?
Exactly. I know that's on my wish list each month, right? So it's easy to kind of think, oh, I like that answer, and to drift towards what works for me as a case manager. But we want to dig deep, right? We want to know what they really care about. And that's, if we can't do that, then the engagement gets tricky and doesn't feel real. So we want to keep re-anchoring our work back to their goals and their values. We always want to offer choices, and we talked a little bit about this before. Folks who've been traumatized feel powerless, right? We talked a little bit about they lost control. So where are we going to meet? What's the order we're going to talk about things today? Do we talk about this today or another time? And that choice isn't just a courtesy, but it's actually a clinical tool. It's what builds the relationship with our tenants. Pace, when I thought of this, is your pace matched to your client's readiness? And you've got your charts out and you're like, man, I got 10 people to talk to today and we got to keep this moving. And, and we know this. Your supervisors, woo, where's the assessment? Where's the service plan? How many people did you see? And those things are all really true. But we know that if you move too fast, you can lose your client along the way, right? And it can trigger withdrawal. And that readiness is real, it varies, and we need to check in the pace that we're working and what clients are ready to do. And clients, we talked a little bit about this before, may feel stuck, but what they're telling us is they just need more time, and they might need a different on-ramp or a different intervention in this, right? Andrew, do you have thoughts there?
Just you don't want to be a chase manager. You all know what that is. It's
Yeah.
chasing people around. You don't want to be a chase manager. And these are techniques that help you not be in that role, because that's a drag.
Yeah, there you go. We always want to validate fear, frustration, and ambivalence, right? I know Andrew's great at ambivalence, right? It's not a problem to overcome. It's normal part of change, especially for folks who previously had systems that really ended badly. So we want to name it, we want to normalize it, we want to say to folks, it makes complete sense that that you feel really torn. We always want to reduce shame. It's okay to feel that way. Makes sense that you feel that way. That helps us keep our door open, and we don't want to push against ambivalence. Andrea loves ambivalence. Here's more on ambivalence, Andrea. Or is that enough?
Look, you know what? People have made choices before that haven't worked out for them, and they've made other choices that we may not support that have worked out for them in some way, right? So that people are ambivalent. It's scary. You need that hope. You need the trust that some of this will work. And we also need to, let people try the things that has worked for them before and then debrief it with them. It's a normal process. I also just want to say, as a case manager, I used to panic when people weren't moving fast enough, right? I did. I would panic and I'd say, "Oh, I'm terrible as a case manager." In
Yep.
fact, my clients would say to me, "I want a good case manager. I want somebody who's smart." And I'd think, "Oh God," right? But you know what? The truth is, take a breath, right? You are a good case manager by listening to people. And if it takes a little longer, it takes a little longer. It's the same thing that Liz said, is we're going to ask people if they're comfortable doing things in an assessment. I mean, would you give all that information to somebody you don't trust? So that, take a breath, realize that this is going to take some time and it's going to take some time to unfold. Given that, I know you guys have a system where you have to do certain things in certain times. So share that with people, right? But get as much as you can, right? And if you come back to it, or if people don't tell you the whole story, that's fine. That's normal. Look, if people spill out the whole story, then they're completely, right? Then what happens is they spill out the whole story to you, but they also spill out the whole story to landlords. They also spill out the whole story to everybody they meet, right? We don't want to encourage that kind of behavior. So a little reticence is a good thing. So just relax a little bit, right? You try to get what you can, and then you move on with the information.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. We've talked a lot about are you being consistent and persistent, so I won't say too much more about that, but just that consistency and being persistent says to folks like you're worth it, you're worth staying for. And for the folks that we're working with, this can be really transformative because they may not have ever heard this or they may not have heard this for a long time. So that's really, really powerful and helps build a relationship and helps build the chances that they will engage with us. And we also talked a little bit about is there someone else who already has a relationship you can leverage? So anyone who can come in. Again, you don't have to be the only person that folks trust, a peer navigator, community worker, family member, someone who already have a relationship in. Bringing them in, of course, with the client's consent, can help bridge the gap, accelerate the engagement, and really more effectively, starting then from scratch if you don't have that. And sometimes you won't have that. You won't have those kind of natural supports, but if you have them, you want to use them. Okay. All right, we are going to talk about Brian. So I'll read this. Brian recently moved out of his tent and into an apartment. The outreach team helped him find the place. Brian usually does not respond to your calls, and he's never been home when you stop by. You saw him once briefly at his door, and he screamed at you because your knocking scared his dog. Other than that, you have only met him once at the lease signing. He said he's good and doesn't need any more help. The landlord says he hasn't paid his rent. What strategies are you going to use to engage him? So, does anyone know Brian? I'm looking out there. Yes. Yes. Any thoughts? Any thoughts on how we're going to get Brian?
Probably ease into the conversation, engaging him and saying, "Hey, I know that you're feeling safe, but I've received some concerning calls and I just want to follow up and make sure that we're keeping you on this, housing plan and keep you safe with your dog.
Yep.
I really want to just discuss how we can best help you with that."
I love that. I love the focus on housing because he's there. So that's a good thing. And his dog, right? So we know that he does. I have a dog. I feel the same way. That if you want, you're in with Brian, might be through his dog. Great. Anyone else? Anyone else know Brian or have thoughts about a Brian in your
I would
life?
ask if they needed some kind of help, if there's anything I can do to assist and, allow them to know that I would provide the support behind that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would reach out to him and basically yeah, try to meet him where he's at and try to see what I can do for him. Try to make it more about him and how we can help him get through
Yep.
whatever situation that he's in, to let him know that this is the plan that he's built, the plan that he wants to go through with, and let's try to make it work so it won't be any type of problems.
I like that. I like reminding him that this was his idea, right? That going into housing, right? Again, so we've been talking about choice and giving him that credit. Andrew, you were going to say something?
What do you think his goal is? Sometimes people's goal is to having a safe place for their pets. right? He may not be able to talk about that it's for him, but it may be the pet. So maybe that's the way in, right? Maybe do something for the pet,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes, even saying, there's a dog park a ways, and I know me knocking on the door freaks out the dog. So how about we go together to the dog park, right? And then have a conversation about what does he need to keep his pet safe.
Great. Okay. All
Right.
right. Great. Well, I'm going to hand it back over to Matt to talk about critical time intervention.
Critical time intervention, it's an evidence-based practice. And this means that over time, the actual structure of CTI or critical time intervention has been tested. We've collected data. We have information on participants in programs that use CTI, and the outcomes are consistently better than programs that don't use CTI. So that's what we mean by evidence-based. There are concrete essential elements of this practice of CTI. We're going to talk at a pretty high level, essentially, of what they are and how they might apply to the work that you're doing. Typically, CTI is used as clients are being engaged in a housing search and newly transitioning into their own place. And during that time, during that transition of managing a new household or setting that up and kind of taking on the responsibilities of tenancy, there are lots of issues that bubble up, and CTI is specifically designed to anticipate and then manage what we expect to be a challenging transition period for folks. What we know about CTI is that it's built around this concept of transitions themselves being difficult. So we might think someone who's been on the land, who's been unsheltered, who's been in shelter for extended periods of time, finally we get them into housing and we're now done. We've solved the major crisis. But in fact, that transition, that movement, or that change in their experience, their life experience from managing their day-to-day existence, either in a congregate shelter environment or living on the land, and now being isolated in their own apartment and having the sort of obligations of a lease, which feels like, this sword hanging over their head. That's real. It might bring up lots of kind of issues for them where we might not interpret the move into housing to create instability or a sense of dislocation. It might result in that from the client's perspective. So CTI just acknowledges that any kind of life transition is better if we have a transition plan, if we manage the difficulty of navigating that transition and have sort of a backup plan or a fail plan when things don't go exactly how we planned. It's built on, there's stages, which we'll talk about in just a moment, of CTI that have specific kind of timeframes mapped to them. And typically in CTI, we have specific kinds of goals that we're following at each of these phases. I have some examples of tools that we could use that are based in a CTI approach, but are actually applicable in any kind of housing setting or any kind of case management setting. So I'll share some of those. What we also know from evidence from CTI is that it works. That for the vast majority of people in a structured kind of CTI environment, it reduces inappropriate use of emergency rooms. It reduces the incidence of returns back to homelessness. So there's long-term housing stability that can be a result of CTI. And that's why we're using it. That's why we're introducing it here. And I'm hoping that Andrea will jump in. She is not just the resident expert at Housing Innovations, but really is a national expert. And many of the programs that Andrea has operated over, I don't know, the past couple of decades have built into or are informing now CTI approaches that get used nationally.
CTI is a great thing. It provides you with a structure, but it also provides you with a structure not to make the case manager the nexus of people's lives. It's not saying case managers aren't important. They are. And you're going to hear when Matt goes through this that there's a step down process where people get to test out their own skills. And Liz talked about competency. It really builds people's feelings of competency. And it's really worked. And that the other thing about CTI that you're going to recognize is it's built on both housing-based case management. So you're going to see a lot of the elements of CTI be really familiar to you because I can hear from what you're saying that you are already really good housing-based case management. So it gives you a structure to lay on that. It also really supports your practice, which I think was a big bonus for CTI.
So let's just start with acknowledging what we know to be true about transitions. And certainly this is true for me, and I think this might resonate with many of you. Any kind of transition, going to school for the first time and having to meet friends for the first time, maybe moving into a new neighborhood or other kind of move, it's disruptive and you have to create new structures and new kind of systems to navigate. It's no different in this kind. So what we interpret oftentimes to be a stabilizing, welcome change actually could be destabilizing for that. Managing that transition into housing might trigger things for folks. So we might see their symptoms of mental illness be exacerbated. We might see in the beginning stages kind of what seem to be illogical approaches to challenges or problems. And if we can expect that and manage that as an expected part of the transition and help them navigate that, we're going to reduce the chances of failing out of housing and creating other kind of challenges and barriers in their lives. There are lots of uncertainties when people move into housing for the first time. They have to get to know the obligations of the lease. They have to get to know their neighbors. They might have a new neighborhood or new, bus system or transportation system that they have to navigate to figure out do I need to, increase my income? What's that going to look like? So all of these other elements of it's not simply just having a safe place to sleep at night, but all of these other elements of mapping out what their life is going to be like in this new setting can exacerbate the feelings of trauma that we've talked about in the past and actually contribute to challenges that are going to come into focus or be apparent to you as the case manager. All of these are going to require some additional supports. And so CTI is structured around acknowledging that this transition is challenging and building out supports to help the participant navigate those challenges. The first thing I want to do is just kind of share with you, and I hope that I can find this, an example of a basic kind of CTI assessment. We're going to spend much more time going through this assessment when we do our in-person work. And this assessment and other tools that I'm going to share today will make sure to send out along with the slides. And so I'm just going to walk through this so that you're kind of acclimated to it. And we'll have much more time and you'll have an opportunity to kind of open this up, customize it, create it. If it works for you, you can use this version. There might be other versions that are already in place and you can kind of integrate them into your practice. But we start with these assessment domains. So just basic information, and we're trying to understand what's going on in terms of housing and the history of homelessness. And all of these are just sort of prompts to ask questions and to begin to kind of investigate what's been going on with the client in terms of their housing history, how have they responded in the past to either crises or moves or transitions in the past. And that's going to help us understand how to begin to build a plan that works for them now. We also,
Hey, Matt, in every set, in the first one, it says motivation to maintain housing. Those are the goals. Those are the felt goals that are their motivation to maintain housing. And it's helpful to put it in the plan. I also want to say something about the ever in foster care question. It seems like a weird question, but the reason it's in there is a history of foster care is a predictor of housing instability. So we want to know that they've had some sort of institutional care in the past. That's why it's there.
Mhm. We're going to collect their employment history if they have an employment history. And we want to know if maybe that's part of their goals when you do that sort of so that principle and you're investigating what's going to help them maintain their housing, what's important to them. Does having a job, having income, having some spending money going to empower them, going to give them a stronger sense of self? So maybe there are some either employment goals or building self-sufficiency through income, if that might be benefits as well. And there's a section on that. So what's the status of all of these income sources? Do they have it? What's the amount? And then if there's a plan to get benefits, to get a part-time job, to work towards building a resume or joining a workforce development program, what is it? You can build these out in this employment section. The next section is on debts. We want to know, do they have either past evictions and or utility arrearages that are going to be barriers for them in the future? Understanding what obligations they might have to pay off some of these debts is going to help position them to be able to maintain, just know what options are available, and then coming up with either a payment plan or coming up with a strategy to manage those payment plans in addition to future or forward housing payments. What other kind of legal issues are going on with them? Is there a history of arrest or felonies? Are there any opportunities to maybe clear up some of the issues on their record that's going to put them in a better position to find housing or to find more landlords that are willing to rent to them, and maybe even open up some employment options if we can clear that up? So just knowing what's going on in terms of their legal history to help inform what's a long-term strategy for housing sustainability, their education history, and then if they've had an IEP in the past, what are some of the elements that have been part of that plan? So that's going to give us a little bit of insight into what have they struggled with and what accommodations they might need, if that's an element of their household or if there's something that's going on with them. We just want to understand that so we can manage that and make those accommodations as well. Then we have all of these assessment domains, family, what's going on with all of the household members or kids, physical and behavioral health. Again, these are prompts for conversation, and you're trying to understand, you're making notes of what are some barriers that they're going to have to manage or navigate, and then what's emerging from this as something that you're going to address or a goal that's part of their housing sustainability or housing move-in plan. All of these independent living skills, and we're kind of rating these on a scale of they're completely independent, they're able to do this on their own, versus they might need some assistance. And this is helping us understand what additional supports they might need to manage the responsibilities of tenancy. And if there are other supports that we need to package as part of our housing plan, we can kind of map those out and build those out as part of this plan.
There are a couple of things here. This is not just self-report, right? This is your assessment as well. So that's really important. Or you're going to end up with an assessment that says, I mean, if you ask somebody how they are paying bills, they'll say good, right? And then, okay, so they get a 1 on paying bills, but your whole treatment plan is around paying bills. Okay, so you want to make sure it's your assessment as well. You'll notice that these are all housing related. They're not their typical ADLs. Maybe I'm dating myself when I say that, but ADLs are activities of daily living. We used to do that as part of an assessment, but these are all housing related. And look at the one about in the beginning. It says, is the person able to ask for help? Right? Help seeking and using assistance, that's the most important one, right? So that's our goal, is that not that everybody do everything independently, but people are able to ask for help.
Mhm. The thing I love about this tool, and as I said, we'll get you a copy of this, is that it builds naturally into this kind of summary at the end. So once you look at each of these different domains, you have a sense of what are the major barriers within those domains, and it's building a more comprehensive, a more complete picture of what are going to be the challenges that the client might have in obtaining housing or maintaining, sustaining their housing placement. And this might inform areas where we need to build out some housing planning goals to address some of these barriers, or look for community resources, tools or resources or community services that are going to help you do your job, because you can't do all of these things. It is a comprehensive list, and there's no expectation that once you have the list that then you're responsible, the case manager is going to be responsible for ensuring that all of these are addressed. It's just having everything in kind of one comprehensive place to give you a benefit of that. I think all of the materials will come after the training. I don't know if you're not seeing it in your email right now, but this assessment tool will package that, and it will be sent out with the slides at the end of the training. And as I said, even though I'm sharing this version, Some communities have adopted this, some agencies use a different version that asks very similar questions, or maybe it structures it differently. It can be branded. Maybe you want your agency's kind of logo on it. But we're not suggesting that you have to use this particular version. It's just an example to inform maybe some planning around an assessment tool that you might develop using this as a guide. Anything else to say about the assessment tool, Andrea, in the beginning, as we're starting to just kind of frame out the notion of CTI as a evidence-based
Yeah,
practice?
there's a couple of things. One is you probably have your own assessment tool, and that may be due to other funders or something like that. Look through it, see what's useful to you. We have found this to be most useful to helping people do the transition. I just stuck the slides in the chat. If people, I know it's distracting if people don't want the
Mm.
slides and they can't get them, so I just stuck them in the chat. So that I think that that's really important, is to look and see what might be useful, most useful there. The assessment domains are critical to CTI, so you want to make sure you've got all the assessment domains. It gives you the information you need, but you can also take a look at your own assessment and modify it. We are not looking for people doing two different assessments, because my experience is when case managers or I am asked to do two different assessments, I do neither. So, so that, you know, take a look, take a look.
Okay. So the core components of CTI, there's a focus on housing stability and achieving these life goals. So this is a person-centered recovery orientation. All of those person-centered and empowering elements and those case management techniques that we've talked about are going to be applicable in the CTI approach. There's a pre-CTI, and this would be applicable if you're doing outreach, if you're a shelter worker, if you're doing case management in a shelter setting, or if you're a rapid rehousing or maybe a PSH case manager and you get referrals for people before they've actually found housing. And so you're working with them during that navigation or that housing location function. This is where the focus on CTI breaks this down into the planning and the kind of preparing for housing as a deliberate, separate activity. And then the next component of CTI is split into three specific phases. And these are typically tied to discrete time periods, the amount of months that are in each phase, but there's an expectation around what's happening in each phase. So in phase one, we're managing the transition to the new community, to that new housing. There's an intensive amount of work during this phase, more home visits, more intensive work, working more frequently. Just the notion that those first couple of weeks, that first month or so of moving into housing is really critical. So we want to be available and be more intensive in our case management approach during that first phase. The second phase acknowledges that we cannot play that intensive role on an ongoing basis. So we're really showing and modeling the behavior of integrating into the community and starting to identify some stabilization activities and some maintenance activities that they're going to take responsibility for on their own. And then finally, the third phase is where the case management starts to slowly filter off, and the client, the participant in the project, has a whole plan for how to manage crises that might come up in the future. They have a list of resources in their neighborhood or in their community that they're going to use. They have a plan if there's a crisis that comes up, how they're going to manage it in the future. So part of our CTI approach in that third phase is kind of transitioning the client back to a more kind of traditional residential environment or residency environment where they're actually managing the day-to-day operations of their lease and not having to be prompted or coached by case managers.
Whoops. Sorry, I uploaded the wrong slides.
Oh,
Sorry. I thought I had it. All right.
just trying to be helpful.
Yeah, sorry about that. Ignore that.
Anything to say about these core components? And then the next tool that I was going to share, Andrea, was I think it's
Housing plan? Yeah. Housing
the housing
stabilization
plan.
plan. Yep.
Should we do this now, or do you want to talk about the next?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. One of the things, Andrea, you can do this in your sleep, I know, but one of the things that Andrea always tells me, the plan starts with three goals. And it's important that we narrow this down to concrete, achievable things that aren't overwhelming. So if we gave the participant like 12 goals that they were going to work on during the first couple of weeks or the first months of their housing plan, it would be over, I know I would be overwhelmed by that. So breaking this down into manageable, feasible, digestible chunks, a small number of goals that they can actually work on and demonstrate some progress on, that's going to be more beneficial than to do a comprehensive plan that lists every kind of life domain, every kind of issue that came up during your comprehensive assessment, every single thing that the client expressed in terms of, all of the goals that they wanted to have. And the key here is that we're looking at how these particular goals that are built into their plan contribute to obtaining housing, sustaining housing, and part of that might be through growth in income or self-sufficiency. So anything that is important to them is going to motivate them, is going to be something that engages their interest, has to have a tie back to a housing stability goal. And there's some techniques or some strategies that we can talk about for how to do that when it doesn't seem apparent. When what the participant is expressing is what they really want right now is to be reunified with the kids who are in custody. And that might be a motivating factor, but in order to get there, we first have to get housing. They have to be stable in housing. There might be some home visits. They have to demonstrate that it's a safe environment for the kids to be reunified. So there's other goals that we can map out that are part of the plan that contribute to what's really interesting and motivating to the client. But it might not be what they come out of the gate with the only thing I'm focused on right now is to be reunified with my kids. There might be some things that we have to map out in our housing plan that enable them to actually achieve that.
Yep. You'll also notice that there's a case management role. So telling the client what you're going to do can be incredibly helpful. And then remember I mentioned case manager. If people know what you're responsible for, they'll actually follow you to get that stuff done, which is a much better dynamic in the case management relationship. It also qualifies what you do and it provides a structure. So that's very helpful. The other thing is actually, we have an updated one where one of the columns is resources. Resources are critically important because I want to pick up on something that Matt said. You are not expected to do everything that the client needs in order to maintain the stabilized housing. And that, case managers tend to do everything because they have a hard time with resources. And we're going to talk about resources in a minute. But I think that, defining what resources you need and giving people the connection between their goals and the resources can be very helpful.
Maybe we should just transition to that right now. I have the tenant resource list. All of
Sure.
these things, I can make this a little bit bigger just so it's easier to follow. The idea here is that we're sitting down with the participant and we're using this as a template, just kind of a model to capture the resources that are available to them, either directly in their community or throughout the region where they might be able to avail themselves of. So we start here with just some emergency resources, family, friends, connections, past case managers that they have a relationship with,
You
neighbors.
see the message we're trying to give people? It's about the network of care.
Mhm. And it can also build a sense. I know that if I had this list of like all of the friends and family and connections and the telephone, the address, it builds a sense of, okay, I'm not in this alone. I do have a network. And it doesn't have to, I mean, it can be a somewhat loose network. Maybe it's a case manager that you really, bonded with a couple of years ago. They're still at an agency across town. You haven't had contact with them in a while, but we might want to list that here. It builds the sense of agency, the sense of safety net, the sense of community that the participant has. So we're listing out all of those kind of care relationships or potential relationships that can be leveraged.
And it builds over time. You're not going to get the whole thing filled out.
Mhm.
You'll notice that there are documents for emergencies. That's based on something that Many of the people that we work with were compromised in late adolescence, early adulthood, and they have a hard time with organizational skills, task prioritization, those sorts of things. So, telling people where they keep their documents, we also recommend that you give it to them with a plastic waterproof accordion file so they can keep their documents there. The reason it's waterproof is every person I've ever worked with gives me wet documents, and I don't even want to think about why they're wet. So I always give them a waterproof thing. If you don't have any money, give them a Ziploc bag. But a place to put their documents is incredibly helpful, and they're less likely to lose them. So that's really important. It also allows you to have these conversations in these areas. So that's really important. It asks you, you'll notice that there's a bunch of things. So, like, it lets you have a conversation from if they get a notice from their landlord. Every person I ever worked with in supportive housing knew the landlord's name is on it. There's no good news coming out of that document, so they would throw it away, right? So that, okay, instead of throwing away, you don't have to open it, but put it in the file, and then when we meet, we can open it together, right? So that's really important.
Mhm. And just to have like a central location where all of these
Yeah.
critical documents are, I mean, it's certainly going to benefit the participant, but it also would benefit the case manager because you have like, you can keep a record of this and update it or help the participant update it. So you have, a central place where everything is managed. All these housing documents, we include financial information, banking information, employer if they have it, financial documents, if they have like, medical assistance cards, membership cards, any tax records, all of that. Who's their doctor? Who's their primary doc? Where do they go to get their health care? Listing that here is going to help just to underscore that they do have a network, a support network. And if they don't have a primary doc, maybe that's one of the goals after they're in housing is to kind of get them connected to a medical home so that they have a place to go to get their healthcare needs addressed. It goes on and on. Also has a mental health section, mental health cards, substance recovery resources, if that's an issue for the participant, and then education and employment records as well. We'll give you a copy of this. This is in Word, so you can type right into it, print it out, put it in the client's record, hand it to them. As Andrea said, they can keep it in their waterproof accordion file or wherever they're going to keep it. It's just a really useful resource that underscores there's a network of support and a community of resources available for the participant. They're not in this alone. Oops, let me go back to this one. So the core components that we've talked about, the focus on preventing and addressing threats to housing stability, so paying bills, following through on kind of like the norms, standard norms in either a tenancy environment or wherever they're living, making sure that either they have a subsidies to support the housing or they're building some self-sufficiency or income so that they're going to be able to take over that rent payment if they are paying, or maybe they're in shared housing, or maybe they're, staying with a friend or a family member. That's part of their housing stability plan. But building their income is going to be a critical way to both secure their housing and also prevent potentially future crises if they've got a little bit of income to work with. And then the third component is where we start to document all of those network of supports. And that form that we used that I just shared is one strategy for making sure that you have all of those documented and clearly updated in one spot. And this is then part of the transition at the end of the official CTI period, where you're reinforcing that there's a plan if a crisis should come up again, that they have a safety net of resources that they can rely on, and that the intensity of the case management, the check-in, the duration of case management visits are expected to decrease or sort of wane off as the stability or as the longevity in the tenancy is demonstrated. So this expectation with the CTI approach is we've got this sort of concentrated upfront intense activity all built on housing stabilization, and we're intentionally kind of titrating back the intensity and really supporting the integration of the participant back into the community because they're going to have to develop those skills and be proficient at those skills ultimately anyway. Brokering resources. Is this me, Liz? I think it is. As we mentioned before, there is no expectation that you are doing all of this on your own. It's a lot. Just focusing on managing the initial crisis and transitioning into a safe, appropriate housing environment is a lot. But using the resources available in the community, community centers, mental health, behavioral mental health or community-based mental health services. If they're interested in pursuing a substance use disorder treatment, employment, all of these things are not, those are like really skilled professional functions that there's no expectation that you're going to be proficient in all of them. So using community resources and brokering those partnerships to ensure that the client has access to what they need to maintain their housing over the long term. At an agency level, you might want to formalize some of those partnerships, and maybe that's an MOU, maybe that's a partnership agreement. But on an individual client basis, we want to be able to draw from those relationships and make those connections to support long-term stability. All right. We're rounding out the end of our time this morning, so we wanted to break just for a quick poll. We've talked about some of these concepts of CTI, and I want to just understand from your perspective, what does this mean? So the question is, and I guess do I need to start the poll? Hang on a second. Um, oh wait, Rosa, I'm struggling to figure out how I do that. Hopefully you can jump in. The question is, which of these are focus or elements of CTI? Supporting people through transitions, or is it building networks of support, or is it teaching skills to help people manage their own care? What do people think? Which of these is really someone is like, meet me to the punch, all of them. Really, all of these, working in collaboration, all of these are essential elements of CTI. So we're supporting people through transitions. That's the kind of fundamental element of CTI. Building out support networks because there's no expectation that you're doing this completely on your own. And ultimately, building the capacity of our tenants, our clients, to manage their own tenancy or their housing arrangement without the level of intensity or case management support that's necessary at the beginning. So sort of waning off or pulling back on that intensity over time. Those are all elements of the CTI approach. As I said before, we'll have an opportunity to actually do some actual scenarios where we're giving you some examples of participants, and we'll try and apply these CTI concepts. And I think there's one more in our training this morning. So we'll have lots more opportunity to play with these tools and these concepts and talk about them in real life settings and how you might actually start to practice them in your case management work on a day-to-day basis.
So we are going to talk quickly about ethical boundaries. Some of these seem obvious, but some of them, are tricky and you really need to think through. So we'll just keep saying over and over, get help, ask your supervisor if you're not sure, because it's important to get these right. So we want to always make sure that the focus is on the client's goals and needs and that our relationship exists to create housing stability, make sure the health and safety and well-being are really the focus of the work we do, and that we want to avoid making decisions that are about us or what's easier for us. Gosh, we have this unit that's available. It's not great, but maybe we should push this unit. Always we have to go back to, is this going to meet the goals and needs of our participant? We don't want to mix professional and personal roles. We need to remember that we're helpers, we're advocates, we're service providers, but that we aren't friends, family, landlords, and definitely not romantic partners. And that we never want to create these dual relationships because they create conflict, they create unequal power dynamics, and we really want to make sure that roles are always very clear. We
People
don't want
deserve
to
better than
ever.
paid
Oh,
friends, right? People deserve better than paid friends. And our goal is
definitely.
that people develop a real network of care. And that if we blur those boundaries, people aren't going to come to us for the things that they need. So part of
Exactly.
this is the dynamic of explaining our role over and over and over again, right? But also not having low boundaries, but no boundaries, that sort of thing. And it's tricky. It can get really tricky.
Yeah.
so that having those conversations with your supervisor can really help, right? So, but there's very simple things like do not give, borrow, or accept money or gifts from
Right.
people. This is not a reciprocal relationship. But the other part of this is if you let somebody borrow money, the thing I worry about most is that if they borrow money and they can't pay you back, then they avoid you. And then we're decreasing the case management arrangement. So that's just an example.
Thanks,
It looks like
Andrea.
we
I
have a
see Rosa
question
had a
on
hand.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's Samuel, right?
oh,
That has a hand.
Samuel.
He
oh, okay.
just
I'm
used my
sorry. Okay.
link.
All
Oh,
I'm
I
right.
see
sorry.
Samuel's hand there. Okay. Got
I'll
it.
rename your name.
Hey, Samuel.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm Samuel. I'm Rosa. I'm everybody.
What? Well, I recognize you, Samuel. I recognize you.
Yeah,
I
I
quoted
know.
you all week. I quoted you all week. Ready? We've been knocked down, but not knocked out.
I may
Yeah.
have been knocked down, but I am not knocked out. Well, what I was going to say is I was going to second on Miss Andrea's comments. We're doing that in our peer-to-peer class. A lot of the work that we do, it almost crosses, peer-to-peer,
Good.
case manager work. It all sounds the same. We was literally, Miss Andrea, literally yesterday talking exactly about this. Um,
Good.
the cross between clients, no sexual contact, the borrowing of money, the giving of gifts, everything is just it comes full circle. And I think it's so important that we understand that we have to separate ourselves. One of the things my teacher was saying is that, and she wasn't being rude, she was just saying that we are not they are not our friends in the sense.
Right. Right.
Our
Because
friends
people deserve
need.
better, not because we don't
Yes.
want, right? People deserve
Yes,
better.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And that was basically what she was trying to say is that we got to do better for them and we got to make sure that they're better, but not to become so friendly in the sense of we're giving them gifts and thinking about them in another way, erotic way or something like that when we leave or something. So we gotta keep the boundaries and make sure that we're servicing them and not worrying about ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I just want to really reiterate that is a lot of times when people get help in the past, it has been commerce. You do this for me and I'll do this for you. And that's not the relationship here. And I don't want to create that expectation ever, right? And that, in fact, we get paid to do this job and they should know this and they're entitled to our services, right? And that it puts a whole nother spin on it. But we never want people to think that they have to or they have to pay us for our services, right?
Thank you, Samuel and Andrea. So I think I'll move us on just quickly that we always want to communicate only through the appropriate work channels, and so you know what your agency policies are.
Stay off
And like we
Facebook,
keep,
y'all.
yeah, exactly. No Facebook. And that always, this is a great opportunity to talk about issues or confusion, comments during supervision to get help when anything feels unclear. Okay. We're going to always avoid conflicts of interest so that your personal, financial, family, social, or outside interests
That's right.
can impact or appear to impact or affect your professional judgment or decisions at work. And what's really important here, this is always when I think about conflicts of interest, I always think, oh, well, people know me. They know I wouldn't do that. So it's not really about that. That may be true. You probably aren't going to do anything awful, but it's how it appears to others. And we never want people to feel like there's favoritism or an unequal balance. So it's really important that we keep our eye on these. We know that we don't want to ever refer work-related business to someone. So if you have a food truck, you don't want to have that be the food truck that caters your agency lunch, right? So you just want to keep things as separate as possible. You don't want to accept money, gifts, or favors. We just talked about this from a client or a vendor, and it's really tricky because that client really wants to give you that $50 gift card because you've done so much. But Andrea just explained why that really isn't a good idea. You don't ever want to hire someone for personal work. You know that Sam does a really great job doing makeup, but you can't hire Sam as your makeup artist, right? That's just not appropriate.
Hey, Liz,
Yeah.
Sarah said basically we don't want to do these things because we want people to develop their natural supports. And
Yep.
you're right. This is all about not making the case manager the nexus of the
Yep.
business. The other thing that I wanted to say is what happens, and it naturally happens sometimes, and we've just really got to watch it. If you treat one person differently
Yep.
than another, like if Liz asks me for something and I give it to her, but Matt asked me for something and I don't, people are going to notice that. And what their focus is on is how to get a deal like Liz's, not how to figure out how to get their resource, right? So that you don't want to do that. So I mean, it's a natural thing, right? Some people
Yep.
just click better than others and it's understood, but we want to be really careful that we're consistent, especially in terms of resources.
Miss Andrea, we had an example of one resident going to a staff to ask them for a cigarette.
Yep.
And that staff was like, "Oh, I don't have any cigarettes anymore." But then another client came up and got a cigarette from them, and
Oh,
they went and they showed them, "Oh, I got a cigarette." Well, such and such said that they don't have cigarettes
Yeah.
anymore, that they don't have any. How did you get one and I didn't get one? So you see, exactly. Oh my God, I thank God that I'm in this class because the education is unbelievable. Saber, it's called Saber es poder. Knowledge is power, and the more knowledge you give out, the more power I get, the
that's
more
right.
all of us get, because we are learning and we are seeing the work that's being done, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Nice wrap
We
up.
appreciate you, Samuel. Matt, I'm just going to take a minute, just a time check. Protecting confidentiality builds trusts. We always want to share the least amount of information that's needed and only when it's needed for services. So more is not better. We never want to compromise anyone's privacy risks. We've spent the last hour and a half talking about folks being traumatized. We do not want to re-traumatize folks by sharing information that is not ours to share. We're always going to use ROIs, releases of information, before sharing outside the agencies. We don't want them to be expired. We want them to be specific, and we want to go through them with the participants so that they know what we're talking about. We're going to talk with and about clients in private spaces. Again, it's so tricky when this happens. No one means it, but you're catching someone at the elevator, in the hallway. We just have to train ourselves that we need private space when we talk to clients, when we talk about clients. We're going to always use our agency's approved systems for email, case notes, and data entry. We're all tempted to take a note, to write something on our private computer. We just have to be mindful of not doing that and taking the time to just always making sure that all the information about our clients is protected. And we're not going to text clients through personal phones or accounts. Again, you're going to follow whatever your agency rules are in terms of communicating with tenants, our participants. Furthermore, on confidentiality, you always just want to make sure files, forms, and notes are secure. I have to just tell my favorite slash least favorite story about monitoring. Once I walked into the office that was open to the public, and it was a bookshelf that had notebooks with everyone's names on the side. So we don't have, we don't want to have that. And again, we don't want to re-traumatize folks. And again, doesn't come out of any malice. Just folks always have to be educated about how best to provide, a secure space and privacy for everyone. Lock screens, you're going to want to log out of shared devices. You're not going to look up client records unless you need to know something about them, and we're certainly not going to look up someone who is not our client. Andrea just mentioned Facebook. We're not going to post on Facebook, on social media. Again, we always
Lock down your account.
exactly put this down. We're going to ask our supervisor if we're not sure. We're not going to share passwords, which we're all so guilty of. But just be really mindful that this is the best. Matt started off by talking about respect. This is one of the ways you're going to respect the folks that you're working with. And listen, mistakes happen. So if a mistake happens, you sent someone the wrong information, the wrong email, don't hide it. Don't hope it goes away, because we all know that doesn't work. You're going to let your supervisor know so that you can solve that issue.
We can pick up some of the problem solving next time, but
Great.
which is the conflicted and comfort zones.
Okay.
But how about we move
Okay.
to like the other resources and stuff like that, and I'll do them quick.
Perfect.
Okay.
So these are resources that you can do. Some people learn better by reading. These are some resources that will do it. The Center for the Advancement of Critical Time Intervention includes a lot of information. Also, Understanding Trauma, that's a SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse Mental Health Resource, which has a lot of evidence-based practices. I recommend you look at it. Please reach out. Their numbers, the next one, their numbers to reach out here for Rhode Island. Pay attention to the HMIS help desk. And that next time we're going to talk about housing-based focused practice strategies. And this is the support team from Housing Innovations, and you can feel free to reach out and send us things. And I apologize for giving you the wrong PowerPoint. Anybody's interested in safety on outreach, feel free, but sorry about that. And we will get you the right one and all the materials, and we will get them to you quickly. So thank you so much. And maybe Liz and Matt want to close it out. Just what a pleasure it is to work with you guys.
We're so glad that you're here,
appreciate it.
Andrea. It helps to add the texture and color and examples
Well, thanks.
that you bring to this. So appreciate that, and
Yeah.
look forward to jumping back in again in 2 weeks.
Yep, we're happy.
Thank you all so much. We appreciate
See
your
you soon.
insights and participation.
We love working with
Thank
Miss
you.
Liz and Mr. Matt and Miss Andrea. You just put the icing right on the cake today.
Oh, you made
That's
our
very
day,
nice.
Samuel. You made our day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, listen, I love knowledge and I love being around smart people, and you are very smart when it comes to people and knowing the needs and things that they need to get forward. And that's what I love working at.
Well,
Thank
right back
you.
at you. Right back at you, Samuel.
All right, next time we'll see you.